Okay, here's another show and tell. Now for something completely different. I was going through and shredding a bunch of old paperwork. I have some paperwork from 2008. As a company owner, you tend to amass a lot of, I don't know, records and paperwork and credit card receipts, et cetera, bank statements, everything, because you need to keep some of those types of things for a long time. And I don't know, if you have filing cabinets and whatnot, you tend to really build things up and whatnot. But anyways, I was going through and looking at my old convention materials, and I thought, well, maybe, some people, if you've attended stamp or scrapbooking shows before, you might, I don't know, I doubt if you were ever curious about this, but this is the type of things that vendors, sellers have to do for each show every year and whatnot. But these are the convention applications, and depending on when the conventions were, you really had to get your applications in early back in the day, because if you didn't, those conventions filled up and you might be on the outside looking in, hoping for a cancellation by one of the vendors where you can take their place, because, there's only so many booths that can fit into a given show area. And not only that, but conventions wouldn't just take in, let's say they had space for 150 vendors, they wouldn't do that, because the vendors that do attend with all the different expenditures have to make a profit. So if you're dividing up, a certain whatever amount amongst a greater number of vendors, then there's a smaller pool or whatnot. There's only a certain number of people that are going to attend shows. But anyways, this is from a convention in 2008, so going back quite some time. Yeah, these applications haven't changed too much, but back in the day, and currently too, you would typically pick out your booth spaces. Okay, there'd be 10 by 10s, 10 by 15s, 10 by 20s, and 10 by 30s. We're talking about a single, large, double, and triple size booth. And it would typically be a single booth would be a 10 by 10 space. Large booth, 10 by 15, double booth, 10 by 20, and 10 by 30 for a triple. And the prices, I'm looking at this one right now. I don't remember. I don't think they just doubled, but I don't know. Maybe they did here. So not quite. You got a little bit more of a discount the larger you went. So it didn't just double, triple the price or double the price of the single booth here. But the booths would typically be arranged by, the size of tables that can fit in a booth. So if you're talking about a 10 by 10 space, you can really only fit one table, one 8 by 8 foot table in a booth, and it would come with two chairs. If you wanted extra, there would be electricity, additional tables cost a little extra, and additional chairs, okay? And you would typically pick out what size you wanted. You didn't really know if you were going to get a corner booth too, where you can use the sides of your booth, or if you would be right up against another booth where you only have the front of the booth too. So you had to take that into consideration. Sometimes the booths would say, there would be like a corner space, and maybe that would be a premium, because then you could use multiple sides of your booths. And convention areas too weren't always the same. If it was a big, huge convention hall, it would be pretty standardized, but places like the Carson Community Center, where we were using spaces all over the place, including hallways, little side rooms, it wasn't just one big convention floor, so it was a little bit funky. So maybe getting a 10 by 20 would really be getting an 8 by 25 foot space or something like that. And I used to get the same booth space really for years and years when we used to do the show on a regular basis here. But different prices here, the typical, double size booth, 10 by 20, $1,200, And then you also had to get a City of Carson business license. You didn't always have to do this with the cities that you were going to, be it in state or out of state, but you'd always have to get a state resale type of license. And it could be a temporary one where you just got it for the day, but some states you had to have a resale license, and then, I don't know, that was a big hassle having to report your sales tax every month or something like that when you were only attending a show in that state and selling twice, 2 days out of the year, or something like that. So there are all these little types of things like that that you had to take into consideration. This is one convention type of applications. Here's another one for a different location here. This one was in Portland back in the day when Portland, Oregon had a show. There still might be shows there, but I don't think there's a rubber stamp specific. But shipping and drayage, sometimes when you were attending out of state conventions where you weren't just driving it around to the show, you had to ship your stuff ahead of time. You would have to get the location where you were shipping to, okay? Now, sometimes convention centers, they have shows going on during the weekdays. They have concerts, during the weekend, whatever. You couldn't just ship ahead and just say, okay, save this for the show next week or something like that. They would accept packages here. It says 2 days prior to the show, and there was a $5 per box fee, drayage. Some convention centers, like official convention centers, you often had to pay drayage, which was you had to pay people to take your boxes, and even if you drove your materials and booth setup to the show, you had to take it. You couldn't take your materials in from your car, truck, whatever, to your booth. You had to pay the convention staff to take, to transfer that material over to your booth location and whatnot. So it was different for every location of a show, and it wasn't per state. It was usually with the had to do with the center that you were displaying at, selling at. Oh, and there was always on these applications they would have a convention coordinator would coordinate something with a local hotel or whatnot. And this would go for the attendees too, people that, if you were attending a convention, you can get a discount from a certain hotel that coordinated special prices. So you'd have to call that in. You couldn't, reserve over, online or something like that. Something like this back in 2008. Well, there was online. Yeah, okay, there was online stuff then. I'm thinking about the 90s and whatever, but I don't know. Special note here with all conventions, something that, someone attending a show doesn't really think about, but you had to have all fireproof types of materials. So anytime you see table coverings or table skirts and everything like that on a convention setup, it all has to be fire retardant. So you had to get those types of things from certain types of vendors. And back in the day, you couldn't just order them online, you had to, know where to get those types of things. So the convention coordinator would often say where, you can find these types of materials and whatnot. And, you would have to have those handy. The good thing about those types of materials is once you get them, they're pretty much universal and you can use them wherever. Although sometimes the tables, for the different types of shows would be different. You'd have those big plastic tables sometimes with a big, huge, kind of thick height to them where you couldn't put in clips. Sometimes it was the standard, banquet table, the 8-foot table, fold out types. You've seen them all the time and whatnot. But I don't know, convention setup times, they'd always list the setup times and whatnot. From Fridays, typically it would be from, 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. That was a pretty standard time. And then you can get to the convention in the mornings sometimes too and set up before the show opened. And it would typically open from, about 2 hours before the show opened on Saturday morning. So sometimes you get to a show and people are still setting up maybe They just got there that morning. And some booths, go up pretty fast so they can get it up in an hour and a half, or something like that, and whatnot. At all different conventions, there were things like make and takes, mini lectures. Okay, so they say at 1 o'clock, whoever is giving a talk on their latest products or some sort of you know working with dye basting's or something like that. So when you, as a vendor, you could schedule a mini lecture and whatnot. The length of class, time of day that you wanted, and you couldn't specify exactly what time, but they would try to accommodate you as best as possible. I mean, if everyone that was doing a mini lecture requested 11 a.m. to 11:30, they're not going to be able to do that or something like that. But that's who, this is the type of thing that you had to fill out here. Usually just attendees, people attending the thing couldn't do mini lectures unless you were, I don't know, some guest, you know, instructor or whatnot attending the show, some Suze Weinberg or something like that. You know what I mean? Before she was selling actual products, she would be doing lectures and things like that at whatever show she wanted to or whatnot. But anyways, that's kind of the gist of these shows and all the different types of considerations used to do. It was a real hassle at times to fill out these types of applications here, but this industry wasn't so formal where you couldn't just say if you were attending this show in 2008 and you were going to do it the following year, 2009, where you couldn't just say, I mean, I used to fill this thing out all the time, and unless prices changed, you can say, all right. Because when you're filling out, like, I don't know, 5, 10, whatever, some, companies did 20, 30 shows a year. And if it's the same exact, application like that, you can pretty much tell the coordinator, hey, I just want the exact same thing, especially if they were putting you in the exact same location within the show. That made it easier for them to. You can just say, okay, I just want the exact same thing, and I'm sending out my, my booth fee for that amount or your deposit or whatnot, and that they would just take care of that. But you did have to take care of things like the business licenses in some areas, the out-of-state types of um, sales tax types of licenses and whatnot. That was all on you. And then you had to after a show from an out-of-state place, unless it was something like Portland here that doesn't have sales tax. That was the one state that you didn't have to really consider that. You had to take care of all of that yourself. So it was a lot. There's a lot of little things. If you're doing shows all the time, I don't know, it becomes somewhat of a routine and whatnot, and it becomes a little bit, I don't know, I don't know, like I said, routine. But here's one of the things that you might find interesting about this type of thing. At one point in time, I thought I should really see how much these shows cost to do and whatnot. So here's one for Springfield or Puyallup, Washington. I did this listing of a convention fee. There was airfare, lodging, car rental, because it's out of state for me, airport parking your car at your local airport and leaving it there for 3 days, food, booth shipping. Now, this was back, I don't know, years ago, so the booth shipping to and from at 900 pounds. You wouldn't think that's not 900 pounds of stamps, but when you do a convention, you have your booth display things, you have your cash register, you have your what we call the office box with your credit card machine, staples, shopping bags, etc., everything like that that goes into it. That weighed about 900 pounds, so kind of a round trip shipping was about $900 to $1,000 back, 15 years ago. That must be double or triple now. Wages, accessories, how much, if you're selling a certain amount of those ones, how much they cost to do, how much do they cost you? Stamps, however many you sell for that thing. Estimated cost when you do these shows back when. 15 years ago. I estimated that one to be around almost $7,000. Okay. Now, typically you're not selling them out. So when we used to do these shows like that, believe it or not, everyone thinks, oh my God, you must be making so much money or whatever. But not after expenses and everything like that. Actually, it cost us more money to do those shows back in the day. So we were always losing it, but what I looked at it as was there was a lot of stores that carried our stamps in a given area or a given state. So um, I just saw it as, okay, we're paying this amount of money and doing all this work and whatnot to promote the stamps and to get more people kind of interested in them. You teach them how to use them and promote them, and then they can go and buy them from their local seller, or they can request that a seller in a given area carry the stamps. And there might be kind of a customer that sat and did the make and takes or whatnot. It could be an instructor for that store, and they would know how to use them. So you'd try to be helping the local resellers in a given area, or just to promote your own product. So I don't know. There was a lot of different considerations like this, that you had to take into account when doing these types of shows. So doing shows, that were across the country, it cost a lot of money. When you were talking about airport, flights and whatnot, all this type of stuff has doubled, since these days, if not tripled or whatnot. Just car rentals alone, for 2 days was $70. How much would the car rental cost these days? It'd be probably more than $70 per day. And shipping alone was just so much more than it used to be back then. It was expensive back then, but I was consolidating my shipping things with several different companies, so we were all using the same shipper. So we were getting a little bit of a discount by grouping, I don't know, maybe 5 booths of a lot of manufacturers that lived in the Los Angeles area back in these times. So a lot of different little factors go into it, believe it or not. Conventions are super fun to do. Enjoy being there and meeting everyone, but there's a lot of different types of things that you have to take into account. So a lot of times, but when you're doing like a big circuit of shows, a lot of times people just had a truck and they went from convention to convention, and from state to state. And a lot of times these different convention coordinators, what they would do is, they wouldn't, coordinate. Let's say there was two different coordinating entities. They wouldn't have a show in, Carson, and then another coordinator wouldn't, coordinate another show in that vicinity the next week or the week before or something like that. There might have been things like that that came up over the years in a couple different locations, but they would typically do it from, maybe in the next state over like that. So uh, vendors might be able to go from one state to the next, you know what I mean? And they would be teaching classes or something like that in between those different different convention weekends or whatnot. So they would be far enough apart though, like the Arizona, Phoenix, Mesa, Arizona one would be the week before the Carson show. So far enough away, but not so far that, it's like a 5 or 6 hour drive, so different vendors can just kind of, go around like that. Some vendors had two different setups, and one would be going around in the Midwest or back east, and one would be on the West Coast or something like that, going to Carson, Mesa, Arizona, Portland, Oregon, maybe Puyallup, Washington, or something like that. So that's the way conventions work typically and whatnot. There was a lot of different entities at one point in time, maybe up to about 3 or 4 specific rubber stamp specific ones. There were, the rubber stamping and scrapbook show ones, and there's the more kind of ones, that are more focused on scrapbooking and whatnot. And, a lot of different entities, and a lot of times people were confused as to, as far as what entities were doing which one. There might be 3 different shows out in, like, say, Las Vegas or something like that, and there were 2 or 3 different entities that were putting those ones on. So quite different, not only in the character of the show and what vendors attended, but the locations as well. So, anyways, I'm ready to shred these types of papers, but, you know, thought I would, I don't know, make record of this type of thing. You know, I do these little show and tell types of things, you know, talking about kind of the rubber stamp history types of things that took place in this, you know, relatively young medium that we know as rubber stamping. So, anyways, hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again at the next video.